Am I on? Okay,
Yes.
thank you. As Luke 1, verses 26 to 38, and that's on page 831. The birth of Jesus foretold. I'll read all of it, but please join me on the alternate verses. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary. And he came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was much perplexed by his words, and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give to him the throne of his ancestor David. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end." Mary said to the angel, "How can this be, since I am a virgin?" The angel said to her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the child to be born will be holy. He will be called the Son of God. And now, your relative Elizabeth, in her old age, has also conceived a son, and this is the 6th month for her, who was said to be barren. For nothing will be impossible with God." Then Mary said, "Here am I, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." Then the angel departed from her. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of the scripture.
Of the two New Testament accounts of the birth of Jesus, Matthew begins with a lengthy genealogy of hard-to-pronounce names. But there's a lot hidden in there if you look at it closely. Luke opens his account as if God is searching for some place on earth to deposit his only begotten pearl of great price. Think about it that way with me this morning. Anytime somebody stores something of value, the number one concern is the security of it. So we establish savings accounts for hard times, or we try to combat cyber hacking in our computers, or hide it under a mattress, like the one-talent man in Matthew who dug a hole in the ground and hid his talent. Security. But God's treasure is living. It's not inanimate, like we normally think of treasure. It is relational, not transactional. Flesh, not cash. No checks to write, just a promise. A promise that we're not alone. Isn't that good to know? We're not alone. His name was Emmanuel, God with us. The scriptures describe it in various ways. The prophet foretold a day when the wolf will lie down with the lamb, and the swords will be made into plowshares, and peace flows like the mighty Mississippi. That's the treasure. When justice covers the earth like the sea, and empty hearts are filled with joy, and the dark of human destruction will be bleached out white by the grace of God. That's the treasure. More valuable than silver or gold, and also more vulnerable. God's gifts, then, can be squandered, dismissed, rationalized, even crucified. Where could God leave such treasure as that? With whom would he entrust it to nourish it and help it grow? That's the way I see Luke looking for that. The gospel teases us with several options as appropriate places to leave God's priceless gift. And the most obvious one begins like this. In the days of Herod, king of Judea. Now there's a possibility. God could have left his treasure where we might expect it to be left, at the palace where everything happens. Leave it with the king and the politicians who command armies and assess taxes and pass laws and break a few. He could leave the treasure in the halls of power of this earth. But there is a place who also kill innocents and spin inconvenient information. Herod's palace is a plausible place to house God's treasure, because anytime treasure is involved, it's always political. God's intention for his treasure was to right the wrongs of this world, to pull down tyrants, to level the hills, to break the gridlock, to temper the mighty, to send the greedy away empty, so that every valley will be exalted. That's not just real estate here, it's justice. And it's all very political. God could have left his treasure with that. So it just makes sense for God to do that, to leave it with the movers and shakers of the earth, the elitists, the kings, and his associates. But no Herod yet has ever shared his status willingly. It's not the nature of executives to share anything, least of all power. And that's why every monarch is quick to recognize that the coming of God in this world is bad news for those who call the shots, because it means an end to the life as they have it, an end to the life as they prefer it, and the last thing they want to do is lose it to another competitor. Herod isn't interested in celebrating the treasure. He wants to crush it. To leave God's heavenly jewel at the palace wouldn't be wise, for that would end it before it ever got started. So God looked for more appropriate places to deposit his gem. And Luke continues the search in another direction. In the days of Herod, he says, there was a priest whose name was Zechariah. Now there's a prospect. Why not leave the treasure at the church with a priest who represents religion and good, upstanding, upright folks who wear holy clothes and think holy thoughts and handle holy things? On the surface, that seems to be ideal. A priest has the spiritual expertise to deal with religious practice and theology, and the treasure is part theological for sure, as well as part political. So Zechariah would be a natural. He hung out at the church all the time. It makes good sense as a place to leave God's treasure. And it appears that God considered it strongly there for a while. Because Zechariah, he had a lot going for him. He married Elizabeth, who was a priest's daughter. They did everything right, except for one thing. Elizabeth couldn't bear children. And for unscientific reasons, for us today, that had to do with their culture. Barrenness for a female was a pain to Elizabeth and an embarrassment to Zechariah. And then one day in the temple, while Zechariah was up in there lighting the incense, God tested his fitness to house his treasure with a taste of the good news. An angel appeared, of all things, an angel appeared and said to him, "Don't be afraid. Your prayer is answered. Your wife will bear a son, and you shall name him John." And that's when Zechariah the priest, who wore holy clothes, thought holy thoughts, and handled holy things, was ruled out to be the one to entrust his treasure. A priest so familiar with the holy, yet he couldn't recognize the holy when he saw it. He said, "How will I know this?" He says, "I'm an old man. My wife is an old woman. We're beyond the age of childbearing. It's impossible." Can I get a guarantee? Yeah. And God had seen enough. Zechariah was too religious for his own good. The priestly preference for proof betrays a lack of faith. So Gabriel struck him dumb because he wouldn't believe. And that makes him an unfit vessel. So what's a God to do? The palace was too political. Herod would slaughter it. The church was too religious. It would only misrepresent it. So God ruled out the capitol and the cathedral. Neither the castle nor the altar would suffice. And that's when Luke pulled the rug out from under us with a typical surprise. God would leave his treasure in a place which was at that time the least likely of all places that any human being could possibly imagine, in the womb of a 12-year-old teenager named Mary. So Luke tells us that the first time the gospel is proclaimed by human lips, it's not from the Roman Senate, it's not from the Holy of Holies, it's not at Caesar's place nor Caiaphas' residence. It begins with a conversation between two women, Mary and Elizabeth, facing unusual pregnancies. Elizabeth was just old. Mary was virginal. That ought to get your attention. And these two are comparing stretch marks and swollen ankles with OBGYN talk. And that's where the treasure is first proclaimed. In that situation with big-bellied women singing back and forth to one another, babies kicking, and that's where God left the treasure. The good news was unfit for a king. He'd just sing, "Oh, come, let us destroy him." Likewise, God's grace was too amazing to be believed by a priest. He'd just sing, "Oh, come, let us ignore him." But for Mary, it was too good not to be true. Maybe God is saying to those of us that the gospel treasure, which will one day fill the whole earth, must first be implanted in those who are capable of believing it and cherishing it and willing to sing, "Oh, come, let us adore him." And it's in those very places of weakness and vulnerability which are most open to the astounding intrusions of God. So God slipped into the earth through the back porch, and this is the place where God left his treasure. God comes not to those at the top in their superiority, confident in their sufficiency and their self-adoration, not to those who are whole, he said, but to those who are in need of a physician. That's where he comes. God left his treasure where we least expect it. Isn't that just like God? The Gospel of Luke proclaims that it's into such situations of humble frailty that the power of God is birthed. It is there that God entrusts his treasure to make the crooked places straight. Who else but God could think of something like that? On a dark night in a feed stall in the little town of Bethlehem, the seed which was entrusted to Mary became treasure for us all. And over at the palace and at the church, the religious and political powers that be would destroy it or ignore it. And here's lowly Mary singing her head off about God stretching out his mighty arm. Let it be to me, as you have said. Folks, it doesn't get any better than that. And that's why we have Christmas. Oh, come, let us adore him. And even that is one verse short, because the child who was adored grew up. Knowing what we know now, we'd have to add, "Oh, come, let us follow him." For that's what Christmas is really about.